Samuel's iridescent feathers caught the morning light as he perched on the hospital windowsill, his keen eyes scanning the sterile white room inside. The African grey parrot had escaped from his previous owner's home nearby and had been visiting the children's ward of St. Mary's Hospital for weeks, drawn by some inexplicable instinct. Inside, baby Harper lay motionless in her crib, surrounded by beeping machines and worried faces. Her parents, Liam and Olivia, stood beside her, their expressions heavy with grief as they listened to Dr. Julia explain their daughter's condition. "The tests show no improvement," Dr. Julia said softly, her hands clasped together. "The damage to her brain is severe, and she shows no signs of consciousness. We need to discuss options." Nurse Nina stood quietly in the corner, her heart breaking as she watched the scene unfold. She had been caring for Harper since the baby was admitted after a terrible accident, and the thought of giving up on such a young life felt wrong somehow. Samuel watched through the window, his head tilted as if listening intently. The parrot had developed an unusual bond with the hospital staff and patients over the past weeks. The nurses, especially Rachel, had grown fond of him, occasionally leaving seeds on the windowsills. They noticed how he seemed particularly drawn to rooms where patients needed the most care. Today, however, was different. As the doctors and parents discussed Harper's fate, Samuel began tapping insistently on the window with his beak. The sound grew louder and more urgent until Nurse Nina finally noticed him. "That strange bird is back," and she mentioned, more to herself than anyone else. But something about his behavior caught her attention. Samuel's eyes were fixed on the baby, and his tapping became almost frantic. Dr. Julia was in the middle of explaining the end-of-life procedures when Samuel suddenly flew through a gap in the window, startling everyone in the room. Before anyone could react, he landed on Harper's crib and began making soft, melodic sounds, unlike anything they'd heard from a parrot before. To everyone's astonishment, Harper's tiny hand twitched. Then, her eyelids fluttered. "Quick!" Nina called out, rushing to the crib. "I saw movement!" Dr. Julia hurried to check Harper's vital signs, her professional skepticism giving way to amazement as the monitors began showing changes in brain activity. The baby's fingers moved again, more deliberately this time. "This is impossible," Dr. Julia whispered, watching as Harper's eyes slowly opened for the first time in weeks. "Now she's responding." Liam and Olivia clutched each other, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter show signs of life. Samuel continued his gentle cooing, seeming to conduct an otherworldly orchestra of healing. The news spread quickly through the hospital. Staff members rushed to witness the miraculous scene, standing in doorways and hallways, their faces a mixture of disbelief and joy. Rachel, who had often fed Samuel, stood transfixed, watching the parrot who had become the unlikely harbinger of hope. But even as the celebration began, questions arose. How had Samuel known? What had drawn him so persistently to Harper's room? And most importantly, what other secrets did this mysterious bird hold? The answer would come from an unexpected source, setting in motion a chain of events that would change not only Harper's life, but the lives of everyone in St. Mary's Hospital. For Samuel's appearance was more than just a coincidence. It was the beginning of a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about healing, hope, and the invisible bonds that connect all living beings. As news of Harper's miraculous recovery spread through St. Mary's Hospital, Samuel remained by her side, his presence both comforting and mysterious. The African grey parrot seemed to understand exactly what the baby needed, tilting his head at the slightest change in her breathing or movement. The medical staff, initially skeptical of the bird's presence in the sterile environment, now watched in amazement as Harper continued to improve under his vigilant care. Dr. Julia spent hours reviewing Harper's medical charts, struggling to find a scientific explanation for the sudden improvement. The brain scans showed increasing activity in areas that had been dormant for weeks. It defied everything she knew about neural recovery, especially in infants. "I've never seen anything like this in all my years of practice," she confided to Nurse Nina one evening, as they watched Samuel gently preening his feathers next to Harper's crib. "It's as if he knew something we didn't." Nina, who had developed a special bond with Samuel, noticed something peculiar about his behavior. "Have you seen how he reacts when certain people enter the room?" she asked. "It's almost like he's screening visitors. Remember yesterday when that new intern came in?" Indeed, Samuel had become notably agitated when a young intern attempted to adjust Harper's IV line, squawking and fluttering his wings until Rachel, the more experienced nurse, took over. The Parrot immediately calmed once Rachel was handling Harper's care, but it was Nurse Rachel who made the most startling discovery. While organizing old hospital records in the archive room, she found a faded photograph that made her heart skip a beat. The image showed a similar African grey parrot perched on the shoulder of an elderly doctor, dated many years ago. Dr. Thomas Wilson, the caption read, Chief of Pediatrics, with his beloved companion, Samuel. Rachel's hands trembled as she read the accompanying article. Dr. Wilson had been legendary at St. Mary's, known for his almost supernatural ability to save children others had given up on. The article mentioned how his parrot would often alert him to patients in distress before any monitors showed signs of trouble. When Dr. Wilson passed away, his parrot disappeared, never to be seen again. Until now. Could this be the same Samuel? African grey parrots were known to live for many years, but this seemed impossible. Rachel kept the discovery to herself, continuing to research in secret while watching Samuel's interactions with Harper and other patients. Meanwhile, Liam and Olivia noticed something extraordinary about their daughter's recovery. Not only was Harper improving physically, but she seemed to be developing faster than expected. Her eyes tracked movement with unusual awareness, and her responses to stimuli were remarkably advanced for her age. "It's as if she's making up for lost time," Olivia whispered to Liam one afternoon, watching Harper reach for Samuel's feathers with perfect coordination. But not everyone at St. Mary's welcomed the unusual situation. Dr. Marcus, the hospital administrator, grew increasingly concerned about the presence of an animal in the pediatric ward. Despite the remarkable results, he worried about regulations, liability, and the hospital's reputation. "Seriously, we can't allow this to continue," he insisted during a staff meeting. "What if other patients, families, start bringing in animals? We need to maintain proper medical protocols." Nina, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "With all due respect, Dr. Marcus, Samuel isn't just any animal. There's something special about him. Haven't you noticed how he's always present just before a crisis is averted? How he seems to know which patients need the most attention?" The meeting erupted into heated discussion, with staff members taking sides. Dr. Julia, traditionally a strict adherent to medical protocol, found herself defending Samuel's presence. She had witnessed too many unexplainable improvements to ignore the evidence before her. As the debate raged on, Rachel slipped away to the archive room, determined to uncover more about Dr. Wilson and his mysterious companion. In a dusty corner, she found a journal, its pages filled with the old doctor's observations about his parrot's extraordinary abilities. "Samuel seems to possess an innate understanding of healing," one entry read. "It's more than simple animal intuition. He sees what we cannot, knows what we have yet to learn. I've come to believe that some forms of healing transcend our medical knowledge." The journal contained detailed accounts of cases where Samuel had intervened, much like he had with Harper. Dr. Wilson had documented everything meticulously, his scientific mind attempting to understand this phenomenon that defied explanation. Back in Harper's room, Samuel suddenly became alert, his feathers ruffling as he turned his head toward the door. Moments later, monitors began beeping as a baby in the next room went into distress. Before any staff could react, Samuel was already at the window, tapping urgently. Nina rushed to check and found a newborn struggling to breathe. Thanks to Samuel's warning, they were able to intervene immediately, preventing what could have been a tragic outcome. Word of this incident spread quickly through the hospital, adding to the growing legend of the mysterious parrot. Patients' families began requesting transfers to rooms near Harper's, hoping to benefit from Samuel's inexplicable healing presence. As Rachel continued her research, she discovered something even more remarkable in Dr. Wilson's journal. The old doctor had believed that Samuel's abilities were connected to a deeper understanding of life force itself, something that modern medicine was only beginning to comprehend. Perhaps, Dr. Wilson had written, Samuel represents a bridge between our scientific understanding and something more profound, a wisdom that nature has possessed all along, waiting for us to notice. The mystery deepened when an elderly nurse, long retired, visited the hospital and recognized Samuel. Her eyes filled with tears as she recounted stories from decades past of the miraculous recoveries and lives saved through the Parrot's intervention. But even as evidence of Samuel's extraordinary nature mounted, questions remained. Why had he chosen to return now? What had drawn him specifically to Harper? And most intriguingly, what was the true extent of his healing abilities? The answers would come from an unexpected source, leading to a discovery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about healing, hope, and the mysterious bonds between all living beings. For Samuel's story was far from over. It was about to take a turn that would leave even the most skeptical observers questioning their beliefs about the nature of healing itself. Rachel's discovery in the hospital archives opened a door to a past that refused to stay buried. As she delved deeper into Dr. Wilson's journals, each page revealed more about Samuel's extraordinary history at St. Mary's Hospital, painting a picture of hope and healing that spanned generations. The retired nurse who had recognized Samuel, Margaret, became a regular visitor to Harper's room. Her weathered hands would shake with emotion as she recounted tales from her early days at the hospital. Dr. Wilson was different from other doctors, she explained one quiet afternoon, while Samuel watched attentively from his perch. He understood that healing wasn't just about medicine and procedures. It was about something deeper. Margaret shared stories of seemingly hopeless cases that turned around under Dr. Wilson and Samuel's care, children given days to live who walked out of the hospital months later, infants who defied all medical expectations. But it was one particular story that caught Rachel's attention. There was a baby, Margaret recalled, her voice dropping to a whisper. Much like Harper, the parents had been told to prepare for the worst. But Samuel, he wouldn't leave that child's side. Dr. Wilson documented everything, believing he was witnessing something revolutionary in medical science. Rachel's research revealed that Dr. Wilson had been on the verge of publishing his findings about Samuel's abilities when he unexpectedly passed away. The hospital board at the time, concerned about their reputation, had quietly archived all his research. They couldn't explain what was happening, so they chose to ignore it. Meanwhile, Harper's remarkable recovery continued to baffle the medical staff. Dr. Julia conducted test after test, documenting every inexplicable improvement. The baby's neural activity had not only returned to normal, but showed patterns that Dr. Julia had never seen before. It's as if her brain is creating new pathways, she explained to Liam and Olivia during one of their daily consultations. We're seeing development that shouldn't be possible given the extent of her previous condition. Nina noticed something else. Samuel's interaction with Harper seemed to follow a pattern. The parrot would become particularly attentive during specific times of the day, especially just before sunrise. During these moments, Harper's vital signs would show subtle but significant improvements. Dr. Marcus Geek, still concerned about the unorthodox situation, brought in specialists to observe Samuel's behavior. But even the most skeptical experts couldn't deny the evidence before them. The parrot demonstrated an awareness that went beyond simple animal intelligence. One morning, while reviewing Dr. Wilson's journals, Rachel made a breakthrough discovery. Hidden between the pages, she found a series of notes written in the doctor's hurried handwriting. They detailed his theory about Samuel's true nature. Samuel's healing ability appears to be connected to an ancient lineage of guardian creatures, Dr. Wilson had written. Throughout history, there have been accounts of animals appearing in times of great need, bringing healing and hope. I believe Samuel is one such being. The journal went on to describe how Dr. Wilson had first encountered Samuel. The parrot had appeared at the hospital during a particularly devastating epidemic that had affected many children. Through Samuel's intervention, not a single child in his care had been lost. But the most startling revelation came from a loose page tucked into the back of the journal. It contained a prophecy of sorts. Dr. Wilson's final prediction before his death: Samuel will return when he is needed most, to the one whose healing will spark a change in how we understand the connection between life, love, and healing itself. As Rachel shared her discoveries with Nina and Dr. Julia, They began to see patterns they hadn't noticed before. Samuel's presence in the hospital had coincided with an overall improvement in recovery rates, not just for Harper, but for many patients in the pediatric ward. The Parrot seemed to have a particular affinity for cases that modern medicine had deemed hopeless. He would appear at critical moments, his gentle presence bringing comfort and, inexplicably, healing. Liam and Olivia, who had been skeptical at first, now watched in amazement as their daughter thrived under Samuel's care. Harper had begun reaching developmental milestones that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Her laughter, once thought lost forever, now filled the hospital room. But just as the mystery of Samuel seemed to be unfolding, a new challenge emerged. A series of bureaucratic complaints threatened to force the hospital to remove Samuel from the premises. Despite the mounting evidence of his positive influence, regulations were regulations. Dr. Marcus called an emergency board meeting to address the situation. "We cannot ignore hospital protocols, no matter how remarkable the circumstances," he argued. "The liability risks are too great." The meeting turned heated as staff members defended Samuel's presence. Julia presented her detailed documentation of Harper's recovery, along with data showing the overall improvement in patient outcomes since Samuel's arrival. Rachel, gathering her courage, stood up and shared her discoveries about Dr. Wilson and Samuel's history at the hospital. She read passages from the journal, describing cases that mirrored current events with uncanny accuracy. As the debate raged on, Samuel himself remained focused solely on his mission. He continued his vigilant watch over Harper and other patients, seemingly unaware of the controversy surrounding his presence. Margaret, who had been quietly observing the unfolding events, finally spoke up. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of years of experience. "I've seen many changes in medicine over the years," she said. "New technologies, new treatments, new theories. But what Samuel brings, this is something we're only beginning to understand." She shared more details about Dr. Wilson's work, revealing that he had developed a theory about energy patterns in healing. He believed that certain beings, like Samuel, could perceive and influence these patterns in ways that modern medicine couldn't explain. As if to prove her point, at that very moment, alarms began sounding from the pediatric ward. Without waiting for anyone's reaction, Samuel flew from his perch near Harper's room, leading the staff to a patient in distress, a young child whose condition had suddenly deteriorated. Thanks to Samuel's warning, they were able to intervene immediately, preventing what could have been a tragic outcome. The incident added weight to Margaret's words and silenced many of the skeptics in the room. But even as support for Samuel grew, questions remained. Why had he chosen this particular moment to return? What was the true nature of his connection to Harper? And perhaps most intriguingly, what were the implications of his abilities for the future of medicine? The answers would come from an unexpected source, leading to a revelation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about healing, hope, and the bonds that connect all living beings. For in Samuel's story lay a truth that would transform not just St. Mary's Hospital, but the very way they understood the nature of healing itself. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows as Rachel sat in the archive room, surrounded by Dr. Wilson's journals. She had spent countless hours piecing together the puzzle of Samuel's history, but each answer seemed to lead to more questions. The latest journal entry she'd discovered was particularly troubling. "There are those who fear what they cannot understand." Dr. Wilson had written in his final days, "They would rather deny the existence of healing we cannot explain than open their minds to new possibilities. I fear for Samuel's safety should the wrong people discover the true extent of his abilities." These words seemed prophetic now, as Rachel heard footsteps approaching the archive room. Dr. Marcus entered, his face stern. "The hospital board has made their decision," he announced. "Samuel must leave the premises by the end of the week." Rachel felt her heart sink. "But the improvements we've seen, the recoveries, are all being attributed to standard medical care," Dr. Marcus interrupted. "We've received pressure from various medical associations. They're concerned about the message we're sending by allowing alternative healing practices." Meanwhile, in Harper's room, Nina watched as Samuel performed what had become his morning ritual. The parrot would perch near the baby's head, making soft, melodic sounds that seemed to calm not just Harper, but everyone in the room. Today, however, there was an urgency to his behavior that Nina had never seen before. Olivia noticed it too. "He seems different today," she whispered to Nina, almost anxious. Before Nina could respond, alarms began blaring from multiple rooms in the pediatric ward. Samuel immediately took flight, circling the nurses' station before heading down the corridor. Nina and several other staff members followed. They found 3 children in different rooms showing signs of distress, symptoms that hadn't been detected by any of the monitoring equipment. Thanks to Samuel's warning, the medical team was able to intervene quickly, stabilizing all 3 patients. Dr. Julia, who had witnessed the entire scene, immediately began documenting everything. She had been keeping detailed records of Samuel's interventions, building a case that could no longer be ignored by the medical establishment. "This is beyond coincidence," she declared during an emergency staff meeting. "Samuel doesn't just detect problems, he anticipates them. He's showing us something about the nature of healing itself." Margaret, who had become a regular presence at the hospital since recognizing Samuel, shared more insights from her years working with Dr. Wilson. "He believed that healing was more than just physical," she explained. "He saw it as a complex interaction between body, mind, and something else. Something we might call spirit or life force." Rachel added her own discoveries from the journals. Dr. Wilson documented cases where Samuel seemed to facilitate a kind of healing resonance. He theorized that the parrot could somehow attune to the natural healing frequencies of the body. But even as they discussed these possibilities, a new challenge emerged. Parents of other patients began demanding Samuel's attention for their children. Some even attempted to lure the parrot away from Harper's room with treats and toys. Liam and Olivia found themselves in an impossible position. They were grateful for Samuel's help with Harper, but understood other parents' desperation. The situation became even more complicated when a wealthy parent offered to purchase Samuel's services exclusively for their child. "He's not a piece of medical equipment," Nina argued passionately. "He's a living being with his own intelligence and purpose." The controversy attracted media attention, with reporters gathering outside the hospital, trying to catch a glimpse of the miracle bird. Some stories painted Samuel as a source of hope, while others questioned whether desperate parents were being given false expectations. Through it all, Samuel remained focused solely on his mission. He divided his time between Harper and other patients who needed him most, showing an uncanny ability to prioritize the most critical cases. Dr. Julia continued her research, collaborating with experts in various fields to understand Samuel's abilities. She discovered that African grey parrots possessed cognitive abilities far beyond what most people realized, but Samuel's capabilities seemed to transcend even these extraordinary traits. One afternoon, while reviewing security footage for her documentation, Dr. Julia noticed something remarkable. In the hours before any patient showed signs of distress, subtle changes in light and shadow around Samuel became visible on the recordings. It was as if he was surrounded by a barely perceptible energy field. Rachel, connecting this observation with Dr. Wilson's journals, found entries describing similar phenomena. The old doctor had attempted to measure these energy patterns using various instruments, documenting changes in electromagnetic fields around Samuel during healing events. But the most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A visiting physicist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who had heard about Samuel and came to observe him, brought specialized equipment designed to detect subtle energy variations. "What we're seeing," Dr. Chen explained, "appears to be a form of bioelectromagnetic interaction. Samuel seems to be able to detect and respond to changes in the body's electromagnetic field before these changes manifest as physical symptoms." This scientific validation of Samuel's abilities caused a stir in the medical community. Some dismissed it as pseudoscience, while others saw it as a potential breakthrough in understanding the relationship between electromagnetic fields and healing. Meanwhile, Harper continued to thrive. Her recovery had progressed far beyond what anyone had thought possible. She not only showed normal development for her age, but exhibited an unusual awareness and connection with those around her. Olivia noticed that her daughter seemed particularly attuned to other children's distress. "It's almost as if she's learned something from Samuel," she confided to Nina. "She becomes agitated just before another baby starts crying, even if she can't see or hear them." This observation led to more questions. Had Samuel's presence somehow enhanced Harper's natural healing abilities? Was there more to his mission than just saving one child? As the deadline for Samuel's removal approached, the hospital staff found themselves facing a moral dilemma. How could they justify removing a being that had demonstrated such extraordinary healing abilities? Yet how could they maintain their credibility as a modern medical institution while embracing something they couldn't fully explain? Dr. Marcus, despite his initial skepticism, found himself increasingly troubled by the decision to remove Samuel. He had witnessed too many unexplainable recoveries to dismiss them entirely. The night before the deadline, he spent hours reviewing Dr. Julia's documentation and Rachel's historical findings. In the pediatric ward, Samuel remained vigilant, showing no signs of concern about his impending eviction. His focus remained solely on the children, particularly Harper, whose recovery had become a symbol of hope for many. But as the final hours approached, events would unfold that would force everyone to reevaluate their understanding of healing, hope, and the mysterious forces that connected all living beings. For Samuel's true purpose at St. Mary's was about to be revealed, and it was far more profound than anyone had imagined. The night before Samuel's mandated removal from St. Mary's Hospital, something extraordinary happened. As the moon cast silver shadows through the hospital windows, Samuel became unusually alert. He flew from Harper's room with unprecedented urgency, leading the night staff to the intensive care unit. There, they found a critical situation developing. Multiple children were showing signs of distress that hadn't yet triggered any alarms. The monitoring equipment had failed due to a power fluctuation that no one had noticed. Samuel's warning allowed the medical team to intervene before any serious complications arose. Dr. Marcus, who had been working late reviewing Samuel's case, witnessed everything. The sight of the Parrot coordinating with the medical staff, moving from room to room with precise purpose, challenged everything he thought he knew about healing. Rachel arrived early the next morning, clutching Dr. Wilson's final journal entry, one she had overlooked until now. The words seemed to leap off the page. Samuel's greatest gift isn't just his ability to heal, but to teach us how to heal ourselves. He shows us what we've forgotten, that healing comes from connection, from understanding. The transformation of St. Mary's Hospital continued long after Samuel's departure. The once sterile corridors now hummed with a different kind of energy, one that combined modern medical science with the deeper understanding of healing that Samuel had awakened in them all. Harper, now attending school, showed an extraordinary ability to connect with those in need of healing. Her teachers noticed how other children would naturally gravitate toward her when they were hurt or upset. Sometimes, they reported seeing the same subtle patterns of light around her that had once surrounded Samuel, especially when she was helping someone in distress. Liam and Olivia founded a healing center within the hospital, where children with similar abilities could learn to understand and develop their gifts. Dr. Julia led the research team, documenting cases and studying the mysterious frequencies that continued to manifest in those touched by what they now called the Samuel effect. Rachel compiled Dr. Wilson's journals into a comprehensive study, which became required reading for new staff members at St. Mary's. The old doctor's observations, once dismissed as unscientific, now formed the foundation for a new understanding of integrative medicine. Nina, who had been one of the first to recognize Samuel's special nature, became the head nurse of the pediatric ward. Under her guidance, the hospital developed new protocols that incorporated both traditional medical care and the subtle healing abilities they had discovered. Recovery rates continued to improve, and St. Mary's became known as a place where miracles were not just possible, but expected. Margaret, though retired, continued to visit the hospital regularly. She started a program where she shared stories of Dr. Wilson and Samuel with young patients, helping them understand that healing comes in many forms. The children would listen, wide-eyed, as she described the African grey parrot who had changed everything they thought they knew about healing. Dr. Marcus, who had once opposed Samuel's presence so strongly, became one of the strongest advocates for integrative healing approaches. He traveled to medical conferences around the world, sharing the data they had collected and the lessons they had learned. Though some remained skeptical, the results spoke for themselves. St. Mary's consistently showed recovery rates that defied conventional explanation. The hospital archives, once a dusty repository of forgotten records, became a center for studying the history of healing. Researchers discovered that Samuel's appearance at St. Mary's wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout history, there had been accounts of extraordinary healing events, often associated with the presence of certain animals or individuals who seemed to possess unusual healing abilities. Dr. Chen's research into the healing frequencies led to the development of new medical technologies that could detect and measure these subtle energies. Though they couldn't replicate the healing power itself, these instruments helped medical staff identify when and where healing was most likely to occur. The children who had been in the pediatric ward during Samuel's time formed a special bond. They called themselves Samuel's kids and stayed in touch as they grew older. Many went on to careers in healthcare, carrying with them a unique understanding of the healing process. Harper's own abilities continued to develop in unexpected ways. She could often sense when someone was ill before any symptoms appeared, and her presence had a calming effect on even the most distressed patients. But perhaps most remarkably, she maintained a special connection with birds, particularly African grey parrots, who seemed drawn to her wherever she went. Years later, when Harper had grown into a young woman, she established a program at St. Mary's that combined traditional medical treatment with alternative healing practices. The program, named Samuel's Wings, helped patients tap into their own natural healing abilities while receiving the best of modern medical care. Occasionally, stories would reach St. Mary's of similar healing phenomena occurring at other hospitals around the world. Each account mentioned the presence of an African grey parrot, though no one could ever confirm if it was Samuel himself. These reports were carefully documented and added to the growing body of evidence suggesting that healing operated on levels they were only beginning to understand. The medical community gradually came to accept that there were aspects of healing that couldn't be explained by conventional science alone. St. Mary's became a model for a new kind of healthcare, one that honored both the advances of modern medicine and the mysterious forces that Samuel had helped them recognize. Dr. Wilson's old office, preserved as a kind of memorial, became a quiet space where staff members could reflect and reconnect with the deeper purpose of their work. On the wall hung a photograph of the old doctor with Samuel, and beside it, a newer image of Harper surrounded by the children she helped heal. Visitors to St. Mary's often remarked on the special atmosphere they felt there. It wasn't just the advanced medical care or the impressive technology. There was something more, something that couldn't be easily defined but could definitely be felt. The staff had a name for it. They called it Samuel's Legacy. And sometimes, on quiet mornings just as the sun was rising, people would report seeing an African grey parrot perched in the old tree outside Harper's former room. Whether it was Samuel himself or just a reminder of his enduring influence, no one could say for certain. But these sightings always seemed to coincide with moments of extraordinary healing within the hospital walls. The story of Samuel and Harper became more than just a tale of one miraculous recovery. It became a reminder that healing is a profound mystery, one that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. It taught them that sometimes the most powerful medicine comes not from what we can measure and quantify, but from what we can feel and understand with our hearts. As for Samuel's ultimate fate, that remained a mystery. But his gift to St. Mary's lived on in every life touched by the healing wisdom he had shared, in every child who discovered their own healing abilities, and in the continuing evolution of our understanding of what it truly means to heal. The final entry in Dr. Wilson's journal, written shortly before his death, seemed to capture it best. Samuel showed us that true healing is not just about curing illness, it's about awakening the healer within each of us. His legacy will continue as long as there are those willing to look beyond what they think is possible and embrace the deeper mysteries of healing. And so the story of the parrot who saved a baby became a legend, passed down through generations of healers at St. Mary's Hospital. But more than a legend, it remained a living truth. manifesting every day in the extraordinary work of healing that continued within those walls, touched by the wisdom of an extraordinary bird who had taught them all to see the miraculous in the everyday. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.